A cowboy won a marriage lottery for $5 and found the bride was a giant Apache woman. The woman standing on the platform was beautiful in a way that made men forget how to breathe. She stood nearly a head taller than any man in the crowd, her dark eyes scanning the faces below with an expression that lived somewhere between contempt and resignation. Her hands were bound with rope, not roughly, almost ceremoniously. And when Tobias Crow realized his crumpled ticket matched the number being called, he felt his stomach drop like a stone down a well. This was not what he had imagined. This was not what anyone had imagined. Tobias had been working the Fletcher Ranch for 3 years without a single day off. His back ached from dawn to dusk. His hands were leather, and his bed was a thin blanket in a storage shed that smelled like hay and regret. 2 weeks ago, a man in town had told him about the lottery. $5, one ticket, one bride. Tobias had laughed it off at first, but the loneliness had teeth and it bit deeper every night. So, he had taken his last $5, money he had been saving for a new pair of boots, and bought the ticket. He told himself it was foolish. He told himself he would lose, but a small part of him had hoped. Now he stood frozen in the middle of the crowd as people turned to stare. Some were grinning, others were shaking their heads. A man behind him muttered something about bad luck, and someone else laughed loud enough to make Tobias's ears burn. He forced his legs to move, pushing through the bodies, until he reached the base of the platform. The woman looked down at him. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting mercy from the world. The man running the lottery, a stocky merchant with a cigar clamped between his teeth, clapped Tobias on the shoulder. "Congratulations, friend. You just won yourself a wife." The word wife sounded like a joke in his mouth. Tobias could feel the heat rising in his face. He looked up at the woman again. She was wearing a plain dress that had seen better days, but it did nothing to diminish her presence. Her hair was long and black, falling in a heavy curtain. Down her back, her shoulders were broad, her arms strong, and there was something about the way she held herself that reminded him of a caged wolf. "What's your name?" Tobias asked, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. She did not answer right away. She studied him with those dark, unflinching eyes, and for a moment he thought she might refuse to speak at all. Then, quietly, she said, "Atsa." Merchant grinned. "Well, Tobias Crow, you and Atta here are bound by the terms of the lottery. You got 3 days to make it official at the settlement office, or you forfeit your claim. Congratulations again." He untied the rope from her wrists with a flourish as if he were presenting a prize horse. Atta rubbed her wrists slowly, her gaze never leaving Tobias. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment over. Tobias stood there, unsure of what to do next. Had stepped down from the platform, and he realized just how much taller she was. She moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone her size. When she stood in front of him, he had to tilt his head back slightly to meet her eyes. "You do not want this," she said. It was not a question. Tobias opened his mouth to respond, but no words came because she was right. He did not want this, but he also did not know what else to do. And somewhere beneath the fear and the confusion, there was something else stirring, something he could not name yet. Before he could say anything, a voice called out from across the square. "Crow, that your new woman?" It was Harlan, one of the ranch hands. And he was not alone. 3 other men stood with him, all of them grinning like they had just heard the funniest joke of their lives. And Tobias realized in that moment that whatever happened next would define more than just his relationship with Atsa. It would define whether he could ever hold his head up in this town. Again, Harlan crossed the square with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. The other 3 ranch hands followed like shadows, their boots kicking up dust with each deliberate step. Tobias felt his throat tighten. He knew these men, knew how they thought, knew what they were about to do. "Crow, you going to introduce us to your prize?" Harlan stopped a few feet away, his eyes traveling up and down its saw with the kind of look that made Tobias's skin crawl. "Heard you spent your boot money on a ticket. Guess you figured you did." Not need boots if you're going to be on your back all day. The other men laughed, and Tobias felt heat flood his face. Atsa did not react. She stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable, but Tobias noticed her hands. They had curled into fists at her sides. Harlan noticed too. He grinned. Wider. She looks like she could snap you in half. Crow, you sure you know what you were doing? Tobias forced himself to speak. Leave it alone, Heron. Leave it alone. Harlan took a step closer. You want her fair and square, right? So that means she belongs to you now. Just like a horse. Just like a piece of land. He reached out as if to touch Asa's arm, and Tobias felt something sharp and cold settle in his chest. But before he could move, Ada did. She caught Harlan's wrist. Mid-reach. Her grip was iron. Harlan's grin faltered, replaced by something uglier. He tried to pull his hand back, but she held firm. The square had gone quiet. People had stopped to watch. Atsa leaned down slightly, bringing her face level with Harlan's, and when she spoke, her voice was low and steady. Touch me. Again, and you will lose the hand. Harlan yanked his arm free. His face flushed red. You hear that? She is threatening me. That is assault, Crow. You better teach your woman some manners before someone else does. He turned to the gathering crowd, raising his voice. This is what happens when you let savages walk around like they are. People, they forget their place. The word hit Tobias like a fist. He saw the way Atsa's jaw tightened, the way her shoulders went rigid, and he realized with a sickening clarity that this was not just about him. This was about every man in this town who saw her as something less than human, something to be used, mocked, broken. Tobias stepped forward, placing himself between Heron and Atsa. His voice came out quieter than he intended, but it was steady. She is not yours to touch, and she is not yours to insult. Harlan stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. You, defending her now? A woman who could probably bench press you? That is rich, Crow. Real rich. He turned to leave, then paused. Enjoy your wedding night, if you survive it. The other men followed, their laughter echoing across the square. When they were gone, Tobias turned to face Atsa. She was watching him with an expression he could not read. You did not need to do that, she said. I know. They will make your life worse now. I know that too. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. For the first time since he had seen her on the platform, something in her eyes softened. Not much, just enough for him to notice. Why did you buy the ticket? Tobias hesitated. The truth felt too heavy to say out loud, too pathetic. But standing there with her towering over him and the weight of the entire town's judgment pressing down, he found himself answering honestly because I was alone, and I thought maybe someone else was too. Atsa did not respond right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. The man who ran the lottery. He bought me from a trader 3 months ago. I was taken from my people after I fought back against men who tried to hurt a child. They said I was dangerous. Said I could not be trusted. So they sold me. She paused, her gaze distant. I have been sold 4 times since then. Each time they promise it will be different. Each time it is the same, Tobias felt. Something crack open inside his chest. I'm not like them. Maybe Ada said, or maybe you just have not had the chance yet. Before Tobias could respond, a man in a dark coat approached. He was older with silver hair and a badge pinned to his chest. The town marshal. He looked at Tobias, then back at Tobias. You Crow? Yes, sir. Got a complaint from Harlan Briggs. Says your woman threatened him. That true? The marshal's tone was flat, bored, like he had already decided the answer. Tobias glanced at Atsa. She was watching the marshal with the same calm, unreadable expression. He could tell her to stay quiet. He could let this play out the way it always did, or he could do something different. He looked back at the marshal. Harlan tried to touch her without permission. She stopped him. That is all. The marshal studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. You got 3 days to make this official, or she goes back on the block. My advice, keep her out of town until then. People around here do not take kindly to trouble. He turned and walked away, leaving Tobias and Atsa standing alone in the emptying square. Atsa spoke. First, you have a place to take me. Tobias thought of the storage shed. The thin blanket, the smell of hay. Not really. Then we have a problem. The storage shed behind the Fletcher ranch was barely large enough for one person, let alone two. Tobias stood in the doorway, staring at the narrow space that had been his home for 3 years, and felt shame settle over him like a heavy coat. Atsa stood behind him, silent. She had not said a word during the long walk from town. He could feel her presence at his back, tall and solid and impossible to ignore. This is where you live. Her voice held no judgment, but Tobias felt it anyway. The main house is full. Ranch hands sleep in the bunkhouse. But he trailed off. The bunkhouse was out of the question. 20 men crammed into one room. Most of them no better than Heron. Taking Atsawa, there would be like throwing her to wolves. I know it is not much. Atsaw stepped past him into the shed. She had to duck slightly to avoid hitting her head on the low ceiling. She looked around at the single blanket, the wooden crate he used as a table, the small pile of belongings in the corner. Then she turned to face him. You gave up. You'll ask $5 for a chance at something better than this. It was not a question, but Tobias nodded anyway, and now you are stuck with me. She sat down on the ground, her back against the wall. Even sitting, she took up most of the space. You should have walked away when you saw me on that platform. Told them you made a mistake. Asked for your money back. I thought about it, Tobias admitted. He sat down across from her, their knees almost touching in the cramped space. But then I thought about what would happen to you if I did. At's eyes narrowed. You think you saved me? No. I think I made everything more complicated. He rubbed his face with both hands. I do not know what I am doing. I do not know how to be married. I do not know how to take care of someone else when I can barely take care of myself. Then why are you still here? The question hung in the air between them. Tobias looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the height and the strength and the intimidating presence. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was watching, the way her hands shook, slightly before she clenched them into fists. Because I'm tired of being alone, he said quietly. And I think, maybe you are too. Atsa held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away, her jaw tight. Being alone is safer. Safer than what? Than trusting someone who will eventually hurt you. Her voice was flat, matter of fact, like she was stating an obvious truth. I trusted my people. They sold me. I trusted the first man who bought me. He worked me like an animal until I collapsed. I trusted the second one. He tried to. She stopped, her hands curling into fists again. The third one was smarter. He just sold me before I could fight back. And now here I am with you, a man I do not know, in a place I do not want to be. With 3 days before they decide what to do with me next, Tobias felt something tighten in his chest. I'm not going to hurt you. You say that now. I mean it. Atsa laughed, but there was no humor in it. Every man means it until they do not. She leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. You should sleep. Tomorrow, you'll need to explain to your boss why you brought home a woman taller than his horses. Tobias wanted to argue, to say something that would make her believe him, but he could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. So instead, he reached for the blanket and held it out to her. Here, you take it. She opened, her eyes looking at the blanket, then at him. Will you sleep? I will. Figure something out. That is foolish. Maybe. He kept holding the blanket out. But I'm not going to make you sleep on bare ground. Ada stared at him for another moment, then took the blanket. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Tobias felt something electric pass between them. She must have felt it, too, because she pulled back quickly, her eyes widening slightly. For just a second, he saw something vulnerable flash across her face before the walls came back up. The sound of boots on gravel made them both freeze. Someone was approaching the shed. Tobias stood quickly, stepping outside. It was Fletcher, the ranch owner. He was a heavy man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Tobias, then passed him into the shed where Atsawa sat, and his expression darkened. Heard you got yourself a wife, Crow. Yes, sir. Heard. She's Apache. Yes, sir. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, chewing on something Tobias could not see. Then he spat into the dirt. You got 48 hours to get her off my property. I do not care where you go or what you do, but I will not have her here. Understood? Tobias felt the ground shift beneath him. Mr. Fletcher, I've 48 hours, Crow. And if you are smart, you will go with her, because come dawn, every man in that bunkhouse is going to know there is an Apache woman sleeping 20 feet away, and I cannot promise they will leave her alone. Fletcher turned and walked away, leaving Tobias standing in the darkness with the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Inside the shed spoke quietly. You heard him. You have 48 hours to decide if I am worth losing everything you have. There was no challenge in her voice, just resignation, like she had already decided what his answer would be. And Tobias realized, standing there, in the dark, that he had no idea what he was going to do. Tobias did not sleep. That night, he sat outside the shed with his back against the wooden wall, watching the stars move across the sky, and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Inside, Adsaw's breathing was steady and deep. She had fallen asleep quickly, like someone who had learned to take rest wherever she could find it. He envied that. His mind would not stop turning over Fletcher's words. 48 hours. Get her off my property. Every man in that bunkhouse is going to know. When the first light began to creep over the horizon, Tobias stood and stretched his stiff muscles. He had made a decision sometime in the dark hours before dawn. It was probably the stupidest decision of his life, but it was the only one that felt right. He knocked softly on the shed door. Adawi, need to move. She was awake instantly, sitting up and looking at him with alert eyes. No grogginess, no confusion, just immediate readiness. Where are we going? Away from here, before the others wake up. He kept his voice low. The bunk house was close enough that loud voices would carry. There is a settlement about 2 days' ride north. Small place. They might have work, might have a place we can stay. Atsa stood, ducking under the low ceiling. You are leaving the ranch. I do not have a choice. You do. She stepped closer, and in the dim light, he could see the conflict in her eyes. You can tell Fletcher I ran off in the night. Tell him he tried to stop me, but I was too strong. No one would question it. You could keep your job, keep your life. Tobias met her gaze. And what happens to you? The same thing that always happens. Her voice was flat. I survive. I always do. That is not good. Enough. It has to be, because I will not let you destroy yourself for me. I am not worth it. She said it with such conviction that Tobias felt something crack inside him. She truly believed it. After everything she had endured, she had come to see herself as something disposable, something not worth saving. You are wrong, Tobias said quietly. About yourself, about what you are worth, and I am done pretending I do not see it. He turned toward the main house. Wait here. I need to get my pay. From Fletcher. He will not give it to you. Then I will take what I am owed. Tobias started walking, his heart pounding. He had never stolen anything in his life, had never even raised his voice to an employer. But something had shifted in him during the long night, something that made him angrier than he had ever been. The main house was dark. Tobias slipped in through the back door, moving as quietly as he could. He knew where Fletcher kept the cash box, had seen him open it 100 times when paying the hands. The office was unlocked. Tobias found the box on the desk, opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were bills and coins. He counted out 3 months of wages. What he was owed, nothing more. He closed the box, turned to leave, and found Fletcher standing in the doorway. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Fletcher's expression was unreadable. Then he sighed and stepped aside. Get out of here, Crow, and do not come back. Tobias blinked, not quite believing what he was hearing. You're letting me go. I am letting you leave with what is yours. There's a difference. Fletcher's voice was hard, but not unkind. I meant what I said last night. I cannot have her here, but I also cannot stomach the thought of what those men would do if she stayed. So, take your money, take your woman, and get as far from here as you can. Tobias wanted to ask why, wanted to understand what had changed. But Fletcher's expression told him not to push his luck. He nodded once and walked past, clutching the money in his fist. When he returned to the shed, Atsa was standing outside, her few belongings wrapped in a piece of cloth. She looked at the money in his hand. He gave it to you, more or less. Tobias tucked the bills into his pocket. We need to go now, before anyone else wakes up. They moved quickly through the pre-dawn darkness, keeping to the shadows as they made their way toward the edge of the property. Tobias kept glancing back, expecting to hear shouting, to see men pouring out of the bunkhouse, but the ranch stayed quiet. They reached the main road just as the sun broke over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. At stopped walking and turned to look back at the ranch. Tobias stopped beside her. What is it? Try to remember the last time someone chose me over something easier. Her voice was soft, almost wondering. I cannot. Tobias did not know what to say to that, so he just stood there close enough that their shoulders almost touched and watched the sunrise with her. After a moment, Atsa spoke again. The settlement you mentioned, 2 days north, you have been there before? No. So, you do not know if there's work or a place to stay, or if they will even let me through the gates? No, Tobias admitted. I do not know any of that. Ada nodded slowly. Then, for the first time, since he had met her, she smiled. It was small and cautious, like something fragile trying to break through stone. Then, I guess we find out together. They started walking again, side by side, as the sun climbed higher and the road stretched out before them. Behind them, the ranch disappeared into the distance, and with it, the only life Tobias had known for years. He should have felt afraid, should have felt the weight of uncertainty crushing down on him. But instead, walking beside Atsa with the morning light on his face, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt hope. That hope lasted exactly 3 miles. That was when they saw the riders approaching from the north. From men on horseback, moving fast, and leading them was Harlan Briggs. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out across the road to block the path. Harlan sat in the center, his expression smug. The other 3 men Tobias recognized from the ranch. One of them was holding a coiled rope. Another had a rifle resting across his saddle, though he had not raised it yet. They were not here to talk. They were here to take. Well, Harlan said, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. Look what we found. A thief in his property running away in the night. He directed the last word at Asa, his eyes traveling over her with the kind of look that made Tobias's stomach turn. We are not running, Tobias said, forcing his voice to stay steady. We are leaving. There is a difference. Not according to Fletcher. He sent us to bring back what is his. Harlan leaned forward in his saddle. See, turns out, that lottery you won, it was not exactly legal, which means that woman there does not belong to you. She belongs to the man who paid for her, and he wants his investment back. Tobias felt the ground shift beneath him. You are lying. Am I? Harlan grinned. Ask her. Ask her who really owns her. Go on. Tobias looked at Asa. Her face had gone very still, but he could see something dark and furious building behind her eyes. Is it true? The merchant who ran the lottery, she said quietly. He did not have the right to sell me, but he did it anyway. He does that. Buys people who no one will miss. Sells them to whoever has money. And when they try to leave, she gestured at the riders. He sends men to bring them back. The man with the rifle shifted, raising it slightly. Not aiming yet, just making sure everyone saw it. You got 2 choices, Crow. Walk away now, and we forget this happened. Or to try to keep her and find out what happens to thieves around here. Tobias's mind was racing. For armed men on horses. Him. And Ada on foot with nowhere to run and nothing to fight with except desperation. The smart choice was obvious, the safe choice. The choice that would let him live to see tomorrow. He looked at Asa again. She was watching him with an expression he could not quite read, waiting to see what he would do, expecting him to walk away, to leave her like everyone else had. No, Tobias said. Harlan raised an eyebrow. No, I said no. She does not belong to anyone. Not to me. Not to your merchant. Friend. Not to you. Tobias stepped forward, putting himself between Atsa and the riders. His hands were shaking, but he kept them at his sides, so you can turn around and go back. Tell whoever sent you that she is gone, that you cannot find us. One of the other riders laughed. You got nerve, Crow. Stupid nerve. But nerve. He started to dismount. That was when Atsa moved. She did not hesitate, did not warn them. She just moved. Her hand shot out and grabbed the reins of the nearest horse, yanking hard. The animal reared, and the rider went tumbling backward into the dust. Before the others could react, Ada had already grabbed the fallen man's rifle and swung it like a club, striking the second rider's horse hard across the flank. The horse bolted, carrying its rider away in a panicked gallop. Harlan tried to draw his pistol, but Tobias was faster. He lunged forward and grabbed Harlan's leg, pulling hard. Heron cursed and kicked, but Tobias held on with everything he had. They both went down in a tangle of limbs and dust. Tobias felt something crack against his ribs, and pain exploded through his chest, but he did not let go. The fourth rider had his rifle up now, aiming at Asa. She saw it and dove to the side just as the shot rang out. The bullet hit the dirt, where she had been standing a second before. She rolled, came up running, and slammed into the horse before the rider could fire again. The impact was enough to make the animal stumble, and the rider dropped the rifle, trying to hold on. Ada grabbed the rifle and threw it as far as she could into the brush. Then she turned back to the rider, her chest heaving. Get out of here now, before I change my mind about letting you leave. The rider looked at her, then at his companions. One was groaning on the ground. One was still chasing his runaway horse. Harlan was struggling under Tobias's weight. The rider made his decision. He kicked his horse and rode off without looking back. Atsa walked over to where Tobias was pinning Harlan. She crouched down, bringing her face close to his. You tell your merchant friend that if he sends anyone else after me, I will not be this kind. Again, understood? Harlan spat blood into the dirt, but nodded. Ott stood and gestured for Tobias to let him go. When he did, Harlan scrambled to his feet and ran for his horse. Within moments, he and the other rider were gone, leaving only dust and the smell of gunpowder. Tobias stood slowly, clutching his ribs. The pain was sharp and insistent. Ada was at his side immediately. You are hurt. I will live. He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. You did not need my help. Yes, I did. She was examining his side with careful fingers. If you had not grabbed Harlan, he would have shot me. You saved my life. You saved mine first. Back in the square when you stopped him from making me look like a fool. Tobias looked at her, really looked at her, at the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, at the strength in her hands and the vulnerability in her eyes. I think we are even. Ada held his gaze for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was brief, lasting only a second, but Tobias felt the gesture all the way through to his bones. A sign of respect, of trust, of something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. When she pulled back, her expression was serious. We cannot go north now. They will be watching the roads. We need to go somewhere they would not think to look. Where? At. Look toward the east, where the land rose into rocky hills and sparse trees. My people used to have hunting grounds. In those hills, there are caves, hidden places. We could hide there until it is safe to move again. Your people, Tobias repeated. The ones who sold you. Not all of them, just the ones who were afraid. She started walking toward the hills. The ones who were not afraid. They might still help if I can find them. Tobias followed, each step sending sharp pain through his ribs. But he followed anyway, because the alternative was going back, and going back meant losing her. And he was not ready to do that. Not now. Not after everything. He just hoped the cave she was talking about actually existed, and that her people, if they found them, would not decide to finish what the riders had started. The climb into the hills took most of the day. Tobias's ribs screamed with each step, and by midday he was sweating through his shirt despite the cool air. Atsa walked ahead, moving with the kind of certainty that came from memory. She knew these paths, had walked them before. Every so often, she would stop and wait for him to catch up, her eyes scanning the rocks above them, like she was reading a language he did not understand. They reached the caves just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The entrance was hidden behind a fall of brush and stone, easy to miss if you did not know where to look. At pushed through the brush and disappeared into the darkness. Tobias followed, his hand pressed against his injured ribs. Inside, the cave opened into a larger space, cool and dry. Light filtered in through cracks in the rock. Above, creating patterns on the stone floor. Ada was standing in the center of the cave, her head tilted back, looking at something on the wall. Tobias moved closer and saw markings, symbols painted in faded red and black. He could not read them, but Atsa could. Her fingers traced the lines gently. "This was a winter camp," she said quietly. "My grandmother brought me here when I was young, taught me which plants were safe to eat, which tracks belonged to deer, and which to predators." She lowered her hand. "She died the winter before I was taken." Tobias wanted to say something, but the words felt inadequate, so he just stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. After a moment, Ada moved deeper into the cave. She knelt beside a pile of stones and began moving them aside. Beneath was a small cache, old blankets wrapped tight and somehow still intact, a leather pouch containing dried herbs, a knife with a bone handle. She held up the knife, examining it in the dim light. She left these here, supplies for anyone who needed them. She always said the land provides, but only if you are wise enough to prepare. She sounds like she was strong, Tobias said. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Ada set the knife down and unwrapped one of the blankets. "See, let me look at your ribs." Tobias hesitated, then sat down on a flat rock. Atsa knelt in front of him and lifted his shirt carefully. Her fingers were gentle but firm as they probed his side. He winced when she touched a particularly tender spot. "Two ribs cracked, maybe broken," she said. "You need rest, and you need to stop moving so much." "We do not have time for rest." "We do now." She took the herbs from the pouch and crushed them between her palms. The smell was sharp and clean, like mint mixed with something medicinal. "This will help with the pain. My grandmother taught me." She pressed the crushed herbs against his skin, and he felt immediate cooling relief. Then she took strips of cloth from one of the blankets and began wrapping his ribs, binding them tight. Her hands worked with practiced efficiency, and Tobias found himself watching her face instead of what she was doing. There was something different about her here, something softer, like being in this place had peeled back a layer of armor. "Why did you really leave your people?" he asked quietly. Atsa's hands paused. She did not look up. "I told you I fought back against men who try to hurt a child. But there is more to it than that. I can see it in your eyes every time you talk about them." She finished tying off the bandage and sat back on her heels. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The child was my sister's daughter. She was 8 years old. There were traders who came to our camp. White men looking to buy horses, but they wanted more than horses. They saw her, and Atsa's jaw tightened. I stopped them, broke one man's arm, nearly killed the other, but the traders had money, had influence. They went to the town marshal and said we had attacked them without cause. The elders were afraid. Afraid of what would happen if they protected me. Afraid the marshal would come with soldiers, so they made a choice." She finally looked up at him. "They sold me to the same traders I had fought. Said it was justice. Said it would keep the peace." Tobias felt something cold and furious settle in his stomach. "And your niece safe. That is all that matters." Atsa stood, turning away from him. "The elders made the choice they thought they had to make. I do not blame them for being afraid, but I will never forgive them for it." Tobias stood as well, ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs. He crossed the cave and stood behind her. "You sacrificed everything for her. I would do it again. I know. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. She did not pull away. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Atsa turned to face him. They were close now, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her, close enough to see the unshed tears she was fighting to hold back. Why? She asked, her voice rough. Why do you keep choosing me? You could have walked away a dozen times. Could have saved yourself. Why did you not? Tobias thought about the question, about the shed, and the loneliness and the desperate gamble on a $5 lottery ticket, about the moment he first saw her on that platform, and felt something shift inside him. Because, he said, slowly, I spent 3 years sleeping alone in a shed, telling myself I was fine, telling myself I did not need anyone. And then I saw you, and I realized I had been lying to myself the whole time. I didn't need someone. I needed someone who understood what it felt like to be thrown away. Someone strong enough to survive it. Someone who he stopped, searching for the right words. Someone like you. Adsaw stared at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she closed the distance between them. Her lips found his in a kiss that was fierce and desperate and filled with something that felt like relief. Tobias froze for half a heartbeat, then kissed her back, his hands coming up to frame her face. She was taller, stronger, everything about her overwhelming. But in that moment, holding her and being held by her, he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Atsa rested her forehead against his. If we do this, she whispered, there is no going back. They will hunt us, the merchant, the town, maybe even my people. We will have nothing but each other. Tobias smiled. Despite everything, I have been living with nothing for years. Having you sounds like everything. Outside the cave, the sun had set completely and darkness was settling over the hills. And in that darkness, neither of them heard the footsteps approaching. Neither of them saw the figure standing at the cave entrance until a voice spoke from the shadows. Atsa, I have been looking for you. They both spun around. Standing in the entrance, backlit by moonlight, was a woman. She was older with gray streaking through her dark hair, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that needed no weapon. Atsa's entire body went rigid. Nish, she breathed. The name sounded like both a prayer and a curse. The woman stepped into the cave, and Tobias saw the resemblance immediately. Same high cheekbones, same dark eyes, same fierce presence. Hello, sister, the woman said. We need to talk. Atsa stood frozen, her hand instinctively moving too, the knife at her belt. Nalnish noticed the movement and raised her hand slowly, palms out. I did not come to fight you. Then why did you come? Atsu's voice was cold, guarded. Nalnish's eyes moved too. Tobias, assessing him with a single glance. Is this the man from the lottery? The one who refused to give you back to the merchant's riders? When neither of them answered, she nodded. Word travels fast in these hills, faster than you think. There are people who saw the fight on the road, who saw him stand between you and 4 armed men. She looked back at Atsa. People are talking, sister, saying, maybe you finally found someone who sees you as more than a weapon or a burden. What do you want, Nalnish? Atsa's voice was sharp, cutting through the pretense. Nalish lowered her hand slowly. The elders sent me. They want to offer you something. I want nothing from them, not even your freedom. Nish pulled a folded paper from inside her coat. This is a deed, legal ownership. It says that you belong to no one. Not the merchant, not the traders, no one. The elders bought your contract from the merchant 2 days ago. Used most of the tribe's savings to do it. She held out the paper. You're free, Atsa. Free to go wherever you want. Free to live however you choose. Atsa stared at the paper like it might be poisoned. Why would they do that? Because my daughter has not stopped asking about you since you left. Nal Nish's voice cracked slightly. Every night she asks when you are coming home. Every night I have to tell her, I do not know. She is 10 now. She remembers what you did for her, what you sacrificed, and she wants to see you again. Tobias watched Ada's face carefully. He saw the war happening behind her eyes, the anger, the longing, the fear. What is the price? She asked finally. No price. Nalnish took a step closer. But there is a condition. If you come back for good. No more running. No more being sold. You would have a place with us again. A home, your niece, your family. She paused. But you would have to leave him behind. The words hung in the air like a blade. Tobias felt his chest tighten. Of course, there was a condition. There was always a condition. Nalnish looked at him directly now. The elders will not allow you in our camp. You are not one of us. And after everything that has happened, they cannot risk more conflict with the settlements. It is not personal. It is survival. It is cowardice, Atsa said, her voice low and dangerous. Maybe. Nalnish did not flinch. But it is also the only way they could justify spending everything they had to free you. They told themselves they were saving one of their own, bringing you home. But they cannot do that if you bring him with you. Tobias forced himself to speak. Ada, take it. She whipped around to face him. What? Take the offer. Go back to your people. See your niece again. He kept his voice steady even though everything inside him was screaming. You said it yourself. We will have nothing but each other. But this way you will have everything. A home, family, freedom. Real freedom, not just running. And what will you have? Ada's eyes were fierce, searching his face. You'll go back to sleeping in sheds, working yourself to death, being alone. I will survive. I always do. He echoed her words from before and saw her flinch at them. This is different than me. You have a chance to get your life back. I never had one to lose. You think I could go back there and be happy? Atsa stepped closer to him, her voice rising. Knowing I left you, knowing I chose comfort over the one person who actually chose me first. She turned back to Nalnish. Tell the elders I appreciate the gesture, but I will not come back. Not under those terms. Nish sighed, her shoulders sagging. I knew you would say that. So did they, if I'm honest. But I had to. Try. For my daughter's sake. She tucked the paper back in her coat. There is something else you should know. The merchant who owned your contract, he is not happy about the elders interfering. He has been asking questions, offering money for information about where you might have gone. And there are men in the settlements who will do anything for money. How long do we have? Tobias asked. A day, maybe two. Nalnish looked. Between them. There's a place 3 days' ride west. A settlement near the border. Small enough that the merchant's reach does not extend that far. Rough enough that people do not ask questions. You could disappear there. Start over. Why are you telling us this? Atsa asked. Nalnish smiled sadly. Because you are my sister and because maybe the elders are wrong. Maybe choosing someone who chooses you back is worth more than safety. She walked to the cave entrance, then paused and looked back. My daughter's name is Khan now. She changed it last year. Said she wanted a name. That meant her life was her own. I thought you should know that. What you did for her, it mattered. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness outside. Ada stood very still, staring. At the empty entrance, Tobias waited, giving her time. Finally, she turned to him. You were really going to let me go? Yes, even though it would have destroyed you. Yes. She crossed to him in 3 long strides and pulled him into a fierce embrace. He gasped as pain shot through his ribs, but he did not pull away. You are an idiot, she said into his shoulder. A stubborn, selfless idiot. I know we could have that life. The safe one, the easy one. All I would have to do is walk away from you. She pulled back to look at him. But I do not want easy. I want real. And you're the only real thing I have found in years. Tobias cooped her face with both hands. Then we go west. 3 days we find that settlement, and we start over together. Together, she repeated. Then she kissed him again. Softer this time, like a promise being sealed. When they broke apart, she rested her head against his chest, careful of his injured ribs. We should leave before dawn, before anyone else finds us. Agreed. Tobias held her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard horses. But maybe it was just his imagination. Maybe it was just the fear that had been following them since the moment he won that lottery ticket. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on the feeling of her in his arms. Solid, real, worth every risk. They had 3 days to reach safety. 3 days to outrun the merchant and his men. 3 days before they could finally stop looking over their shoulders. But first they had to survive the night. And as the sound of horses grew louder closer, Tobias realized with cold certainty that surviving might be harder than he thought because whoever was coming was not being careful. They were not hiding. Their approach, which meant they did not care if they were heard, which meant they were confident. And confidence in men like that usually meant numbers. Numbers they could not fight. Numbers they could only run from. If they were fast enough, if they were lucky enough, if they had any luck left at all. The sound of horses grew louder. Tobias counted at least 6, maybe more. Too many to fight, too many to reason with. I grabbed his hand and pulled him deeper into the cave. There is another way out, a passage my grandmother showed me. It is narrow, but we can fit. They moved quickly through the darkness. Atsa navigating by memory, while Tobias kept one hand on her back and the other pressed against his aching ribs. Behind them, voices echoed into the cave. Men shouting, boots scraping on stone. The merchant had sent more than just riders this time. He had sent hunters. The passage it saw led them through was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Tobias had to turn sideways in places, biting back groans as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. But they kept moving, kept pushing forward until finally the passage opened up and they stumbled out onto a rocky hillside. The night air hit them like cold water. Below, they could see torches moving through the darkness. The men were spreading out, searching. They will find. The passage eventually whispered. We need distance fast. She looked west, toward where Nish had said the settlement lay. 3 days on foot, maybe 2 if they pushed hard and did not stop. But Tobias was already struggling. His breathing labored, his face pale, even in the moonlight. I will slow you down, he said. Then we go slow together. I took his arm and wrapped it around her shoulders, supporting his weight. We made it this far. We are not giving up now. They moved through the night like ghosts, using every shadow and every rock for cover. Atsa's knowledge of the land kept them ahead of the searchers. She knew which paths made noise and which stayed silent. Knew where water ran so their tracks would be harder to follow. Knew how to read the stars and keep them moving in the right direction, even when exhaustion threatened to drag them both down. By the time the sun rose on the first day, they had put miles between themselves and the cave. But the pursuit did not stop. Throughout that day and the next, they saw riders on the horizon, saw smoke from distant camps. The merchant was not giving up. He had invested too much, lost too much face. This had become about more than money. It had become about pride. On the second night, they found shelter in a dried riverbed beneath an overhang of rock. Tobias's fever had started that afternoon, his body finally rebelling against the cracked ribs and the constant movement. Ada held him while he shivered, using her own body heat to keep him warm. She whispered to him in her own language, words he did not understand but that sounded like prayers or promises or both. I'm slowing you down, he mumbled through chattering teeth. You are keeping me human, she replied. Without you, I will be just survival, just anger, just running. With you, I have a reason to stop running, a reason to build something instead of just endure. She kissed his forehead. So rest. Tomorrow we reach the settlement. Tomorrow we start over. The third day, dawn gray and cold. Tobias's fever had broken sometime in the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. They helped each other up and kept moving. By midday they saw it. A cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of hammers and voices carrying on the wind. The settlement, small, rough, and beautiful in its isolation. They walked into town together. 2 people who looked like they had been through a war. And in a way they had the settlement was exactly as Nish had described. Rough, enough that people did not ask too many questions, isolated enough that the merchant's influence did not reach. The first person they spoke to was a woman running a boarding house. She took one look at them and nodded toward the stairs. $2 a week includes meals. No trouble. No trouble. Atsa agreed. That night, after they had eaten and washed, and finally felt safe enough to breathe, they stood together in the small room they had rented. It had a real bed, a real window, a real door that locked from the inside. Luxuries they had not. Known they missed until they had them again. Tobias took Adsaw's hand. I know this is not what you imagined when you thought about getting married. No ceremony, no witnesses, no fancy dress. Just us in a room barely bigger than the shed I used to live in. It is perfect, Atsa said, and she meant it. Because it was theirs, earned through blood and fear and refusing to give up on each other. She reached up and touched his face. A cowboy won a marriage lottery for $5 and found the bride was a giant Apache woman. That is how the story starts. But this is how it ends. Not with him owning her, not with her needing him, but with two people choosing each other every single day. Tobias smiled. That is a better ending than I deserve. Then it is a good thing you do not get to decide what you deserve. She kissed him. I do. They held each other in that small room while the settlement settled into sleep around them. Outside, the world continued. Men still hunted. Merchants still schemed. Tribes still struggled. But in that room, in that moment, two people who had been told they were worthless found something more valuable than gold. They found each other, and they found home. 3 months later, they would stand before a circuit judge and make it official with papers and signatures and all the things society required. But the real marriage had already happened. It happened when Tobias first refused to walk away, when Atsa first smiled, when they fought together, ran together, chose together. That was the marriage that mattered. Everything else was just catching up. In the settlement, they built a life, simple, honest, and entirely their own. Tobias found work at a lumber mill. Ada started a small business repairing saddles and tack. Her strong hands making her reputation spread quickly. People learned not to ask where they came from, learned to respect the quiet strength they carried, learned that sometimes the best stories are the ones where two people against the world discover they are stronger together than they ever were apart. And when people asked Tobias if he regretted spending his last $5 on that lottery ticket, he always gave the same answer. Best investment I ever made. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier where unlikely bonds are forged and courage is tested in ways you never expected. Do not forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.